The issue of gender-based violence has been gaining prominence here and around the world, especially when it comes to the impact on victims and actions against perpetrators. But little is known about conflict-related sexual violence, something that's becoming more prevalent even as a tool of warfare. It's an issue that's being discussed at a major conference here in Melbourne with a focus on the Asia-Pacific region. One of the keynote speakers is Professor Kim Thuy Seelinger, an expert on sexual violence and senior coordinator on gender-based crimes at the International Criminal Court's Prosecutor's Office, and she is with me in the studio. Good to have you with us, Professor Seelinger. Now, conflict-related sexual violence, it's not a legal nor a technical term. How do you define it, and why is it important to have a definition?
Yes, that's a great question. And I should clarify, I am no longer with the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. So just to make that very clear, I can't speak on their behalf now. But conflict-related sexual violence, it is any act of violence involving a sexual act that is related either directly or indirectly to an armed conflict. And this could include, of course, not just rape, but other forms of violence like forced nudity, forced pregnancy, maybe forced marriage if characterized as certain inhumane acts. It could involve forced sterilization in some cases. So there are a number of different forms of sexual violence that may be related to a conflict because of the nature of the conflict or the identity of a perpetrator or a victim. And it's important to highlight it because I think for very many years, this type of violence was just assumed to be a corollary or just incidental to war. But actually what we do find is, as you said, sometimes it is an integral part of the method of warfare, and it is something that many people suffer.
So where are we seeing this in our immediate region here in the Asia-Pacific, and how is it used as a tool of warfare?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. Now, I'm not an expert on this region. I want to make that very clear, but I think there are, of course, some situations that have captured worldwide attention to start with. I think many people around the world are paying some attention to events in Afghanistan, for example. We know, of course, about the conditions under the Taliban regime right now that include many forms of gender-based crimes under international law. And so we see, for example, the denial of education for girls as part of the regime's ideology, the Taliban ideology. Also, of course, there are reports of women and their allies who are protesting for gender equality in Afghanistan, and they are punished severely for that, often arrested and detained. There are reports of rape in prison, for example. And this violence also affects LGBTQI individuals in Afghanistan who are systematically oppressed and punished. So there is attention on this in Afghanistan. We also, I think, have worldwide attention on the situation in Myanmar, yes, which has a number of different facets to it, but there's a lot of focus on the events in Rakhine State, in particular against the Rohingya population, with, of course, many reports and documentation of conflict-related sexual violence perpetrated against Rohingya women and girls in particular. Rape, forced nudity, other types of humiliation of a sexual nature.
And how, would you as a researcher and also, other international aid organizations that are focused on this form of violence able to even get any information? Because you're talking about a place like Myanmar where, you've got a military dictatorship that runs the country. There's only so much information that you can get. So how underreported is this?
Our sense is that conflict-related sexual violence is always underreported, no matter what the conflict. Many reasons are related to how heavily stigmatized it is, the taboos about talking about sex, violence in many cultures, for example. So that, I think, underreporting is a universal challenge. But as you say, in Afghanistan and Myanmar, where we don't have access to territory, there's a lot of reliance on local human rights defenders, local community organizations, victims associations that are often at great risk collecting information. They're documenting and finding ways to transmit that information abroad. And so it's different. It's quite challenging. We also have, in both cases, a very strong diaspora community, including here in Australia, actually, But many times it is the Afghans or the Burmese in exile who are able to share information about what happened to them. And so
and are these considered? Can these be considered international crimes? And is there a way that the perpetrators can be held accountable?
In many cases, it seems quite clear that they are international crimes. So, which means, of course, we're referring to either war crimes if it's in the context of an international or non-international armed conflict, and there's a relationship between the conduct and that conflict. It could be a crime against humanity, where there's a widespread or a systematic attack against a civilian population, and the conduct we're talking about is part of that widespread or systematic attack. The sexual violence itself does not have to be widespread or systematic, but it has to be associated with that civilian attack. Or it could potentially, be an act of genocide, which is sometimes quite hard to prove because while the disparate acts that might constitute an act of genocide might be visible, one has to prove the intent to destroy a population, either in whole or in part.
Yes, that's hard to prove. Now, the conference that you are here for, it is called Justice Denied, Fighting Widespread Impunity for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. So the question is right there, how do you fight it?
Yeah, this is a good question. There are avenues to accountability sometimes, right? We obviously have, in the case of Myanmar, a genocide convention-based case before the International Court of Justice. There is a case before the International Criminal Court. There is a UN mechanism, an independent investigating mechanism focused on Myanmar that is gathering documentation and analyzing it, preparing it for use by prosecutors and other fora. So that is one avenue to formal justice. But to fight it is a lot more than just bringing people to court if you can ever secure the arrest of an accused person. I think it takes a number of things. You have to think about law reform, for one thing. Do you have a legal framework that allows accountability to happen? Right? For example, many states in the Asia-Pacific region haven't yet ratified the Rome Statute.
Yeah.
Right? And so this may be a missing part of the legal framework for many countries in this region. But also one has to invest in fighting gender inequality to begin with. Right? The reason this tool of conflict-related sexual violence holds such power and can displace populations and terrorize people is because it is wielded in the context of gender inequality generally. And so investing in that.
Yes, and research has also shown that this is prevalent even in countries like Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste. So what can countries like Australia do to help people who are going through this sort of violence in these countries?
I'm really glad you asked that because I've been thinking about that today. Just listening to all of the great speakers at the conference that our colleagues are hosting. A couple of things. I think right now we are in a moment where doing work related to gender-based violence has become more challenging than ever, right? And Australia is a massive resource in the region in terms of being able to support humanitarian work, support law, rule of law work. I think that is important for your country. But also I was thinking about whether you have the potential of prosecuting some of these cases in your own courts. In Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste, it's not feasible right now. In Sri Lanka, we haven't seen, despite many years of passage since the conflict there, we haven't seen real accountability in the courts of Sri Lanka either. You have an incredible justice system. And through the principle of universal jurisdiction, I've been wondering, what would it take? How hard would it be for the Australian justice system to pick up these cases and try them on your soil, whether or not the crimes were committed here at all, affected your citizens at all? This is something countries like Switzerland, Belgium, France, Norway, Sweden, Finland, many countries in Europe are doing. They're trying cases that happened in Africa or Syria, for example. So I think that would be really exciting to see in terms of Australia's role in justice in this region.
Yes, let's hope that there is more progress in this area on this front. Professor Kim Thuy Seelinger, really good to have you shed more light on what is such an important issue in our region. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.